How can you explain the coincidence of the scent of the Cadaver felt by British and not Portuguese dogs?
Sandra, maybe you should be asking the judiciary because they've examined all this.
But don't you have an
we're
explanation
out
for
for
that?
Madeleine's mum and dad, and we're desperate for people to help us find Madeleine, which is why we're here today. The majority of people are inherently good, and I believe the majority of people in Portugal are inherently good people. And we're asking them if they'll help us spread this message to that person or people.
So you don't have any explanation for that?
Ask the dog, Sandra.
We screened the vehicles using the dog, and the only reaction we've had is to the car in the far corner. And what we had is a reaction from the dog over here, where his head's up in the air, and he's scenting the items that he's trained to find. And when we tie him down, he picks this up.
Hello everyone, and welcome. As a seasoned crime analyst and storyteller, I'm here to unravel the complex details of true crime cases and present them in a way that's both engaging and easy to understand. Today, we're diving deep into the latest developments in the Madeleine McCann case. On April 29, 2010, a ripple of breaking news spread through media outlets across the globe. In Washington, the White House braced itself, while diplomats and officials worldwide anticipated fallout that promised both embarrassment and tension. The source of the story was WikiLeaks, the controversial website that gave whistleblowers a platform to anonymously share classified information with journalists. By then, WikiLeaks had already made headlines with several high-profile revelations. But this time was different. Its Australian founder, Julian Assange, could now claim his most significant release yet: more than 250,000 confidential US diplomatic cables handed to 5 major newspapers. Hidden within that mountain of documents was one cable connected to one of the most high-profile cases of the 21st century: the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. The cable, stamped confidential, was sent from the American Embassy in Portugal back to Washington on September 21, 2007, just 2 weeks after Kate and Gerry McCann had been declared arguidos, or formal suspects. The document summarized a meeting between U.S. Ambassador Al Hoffman and Alexander Ellis, the newly appointed British ambassador. Ambassador Hoffman's report noted Ellis's comments on the McCann case. Without going into specifics, Ellis acknowledged that British police had developed the evidence then being weighed against the McCanns. He emphasized that authorities in both Britain and Portugal were working closely together. Ellis also admitted that the media frenzy surrounding the case was inevitable, but stressed that officials should keep their remarks behind closed doors. The phrase "evidence developed by British police" was particularly striking. At the time, that referred mainly to the work of 2 highly trained specialist dogs, Eddie and Keela, along with the expertise of Mark Harrison, the United Kingdom's top police search advisor. Brought to Portugal in the summer of 2007, 3 months after Madeleine vanished, the dogs were tasked with detecting scents of human blood and human decomposition. Their search of the McCann's holiday apartment, their rented vehicle, and a number of personal belongings dramatically altered the direction of the investigation. Suddenly, suspicion turned toward Kate and Gerry themselves. What made the leaked cable even more significant was how it quietly challenged a long-held narrative. For years, many believed it had been Portuguese investigator Gonçalo Amaral and his team who pushed the theory against the McCanns. Yet here was a US diplomatic cable suggesting that findings by British police had played a central role in shaping that suspicion. So what exactly unfolded once the dogs arrived in Praia da Luz? And more importantly, where and to what did they react? In this series, we're not just retelling headlines. We're digging deeper. We're exploring the evidence, the inconsistencies, and the overlooked details that might make you question everything you think you know about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Do you remember talking to Kate and Gerry McCann about the sniffer dogs? Do you remember that exchange?
I remember as if it was today. He answered me, ask the dogs. And
What did you think about
I replied, I'm asking you, Gerry, I think it was something like that.
What did you make of Gerry McCann's reaction?
I thought he's being arrogant. He's not understanding my point. I'm not offending him. I just want him to give me his opinion.
Anyone reviewing media reporting on the Madeleine McCann case will inevitably come across the phrase turning point. And the turning point comes after the dogs, Eddie and Keela, arrived in Praia da Luz 3 months after Madeleine vanished. The dogs conducted their searches of the McCann holiday apartment 5A and a Renault scenic hire car. 1 month after the dogs' intensive 8-day mission had concluded, police declared the McCanns arguidos. But the dogs also marked a turning point in a less obvious way. Their arrival in Portugal, along with Mark Harrison, the UK police search expert, ultimately marked a shift from looking for an abducted girl who could still be alive to searching for a child who may have passed away and been placed somewhere around the coastal town or in the ocean. The Portuguese police made enormous efforts to find Madeleine. Yet, UK media often portrayed the investigation as flawed, second-rate, and worse. Personally, I don't think it was as incomplete as it's often painted. From everything I've looked at, they actually acted quickly, taking statements, interviewing, carrying out searches, and doing forensic work as best as they could. The reality is sometimes the evidence just isn't there, and sometimes it simply can't be proven, no matter how much work is done. So very broadly, let's look at what the Portuguese police did. Firstly, there appears to be some confusion over when police were first called. It was claimed police were called just after 10 p.m. on the night Madeleine vanished. However, police telephone call logs seem to show they were not contacted until 10:41 p.m. According to Kate McCann, she found Madeleine gone when she checked on her at 10 p.m. The McCanns had always complained about how long it took police to arrive. Members of Portugal's GNR, the National Republican Guard, were the first to arrive at the scene at apartment 5A around 11 p.m. During the investigation, and even to this day, Portugal's police have been accused of not closing off the scene quickly enough, leading to the potential loss of important forensic clues. But it's worth remembering what the officers walked into. By the time they arrived, the window had already been touched, and the McCanns and their friends had naturally been moving in and out of Madeleine's bedroom in a frantic search. This was a nightmare scenario. A small 3-year-old girl had just gone missing. In their panic, Kate, Gerry, their friends, and resort staff were touching things, opening wardrobes, moving furniture. At 10 minutes past midnight, about an hour after the GNR's arrival and 90 minutes after the first logged phone call, Portugal's official police, the Polícia Judiciária, the PJ, turned up. An inspector and forensic expert entered apartment 5A. The apartment, already heavily disturbed, was then closed off. Alerts were sent to nearby Faro International Airport, the main Algarve hub for flights into Europe. A control post was set up on a key bridge at the Portugal-Spain border, about 90 minutes' drive east of Praia da Luz. Meanwhile, into the early hours, GNR officers, 2 sniffer dogs, and local residents searched the surrounding streets, town, and beach unsuccessfully. In the first 24 hours, 130 police officers and emergency service personnel were deployed. That number ballooned to more than 300 over the next day. In the days and weeks that followed, 443 doors were knocked on. 700 people were interviewed, including 112 resort employees. The search radius expanded from 15 to 30 square kilometers, covering abandoned wells, passages, tunnels, reservoirs, and lakes across the rugged terrain. Helicopters, planes, and boats swept the Mediterranean coastline. Despite holding out hope that Madeleine might still be alive, the police had to consider all options, including the possibility of a serious incident. Soon after she went missing, a small team of Leicestershire police officers arrived in Praia da Luz to assist. This kind of direct involvement in another country's investigation was unusual and didn't sit well with the lead detective Gonçalo Amaral. Still, he relented because Madeleine was the priority. The British presence added manpower and international attention. But the truth is, the case quickly became politicized. Gordon Brown, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, and soon to be Prime Minister, was in direct contact with Kate and Gerry McCann shortly after May 3rd. Now Praia da Luz is a small town with a sizable English community. Historically, Portugal and the UK have maintained close ties, cooperating across many fronts. Against that backdrop, it's perhaps unsurprising that Portuguese authorities allowed British involvement in the investigation so readily. Some journalists who followed the case later noted that in hindsight, certain Portuguese officers felt this collaboration crossed into interference. Then in April 2016, former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, Craig Murray, published a striking blog post. In it, he claimed that British diplomatic staff had been given direct orders to support the McCanns far beyond what would normally be expected, and to exert pressure on Portuguese authorities. According to him, more than one member of the diplomatic team privately expressed doubts about the McCanns' consistency, yet were instructed to attend every meeting between the couple and Portuguese police. This impression of political interference has been echoed by others. Some observers pointed out that the unusually rapid involvement of government officials was remarkable. At such an early stage, the deployment of diplomats, civil servants, and even figures linked to Downing Street was highly unusual for a missing child case abroad. One explanation offered was that the British government of the time saw an opportunity, a case that gripped the public imagination and offered politicians a chance to appear committed and compassionate. So who were these officials who descended on Praia da Luz almost immediately after Madeleine's disappearance? On May 4th, less than 24 hours after she was reported missing, a delegation traveled to meet the McCanns. It included John Buck, the British ambassador to Portugal, Robert Henderson, the consul for the Algarve, Angela Morado, the proconsul, Liz Dow, the consul in Lisbon, and Andy B.S., a press officer from the embassy. That same day, once Kate and Gerry had given their first police statements, these 5 officials gathered with them at their newly allocated apartment 4G inside the Ocean Club Resort. The following day, May the 5th, 3 officers from Leicestershire Police arrived, tasked with facilitating communication between the McCanns and the Portuguese authorities. More British police would soon follow, and on May 15th, the Foreign Office dispatched Cherie Dodd, a former Fleet Street journalist, to act as the McCanns' media liaison. She was later replaced by Clarence Mitchell, a former BBC journalist and head of the government's media monitoring unit, an organisation directly connected to 10 Downing Street. This unit, which Mitchell once directed, advised the Prime Minister and other top government officials on how to respond to the relentless 24-hour news cycle. During the investigation, both John Buck and Robert Henderson made regular visits to the McCanns. The family themselves would later acknowledge that the presence of the British ambassador had put added pressure on the Portuguese authorities to ensure that everything possible was being done. In his 2016 blog, Craig Murray suggested that New Labour under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown had seen in the case a photogenic tragedy, one that could be politically advantageous to support. He compared it to other tragic cases of missing or deceased children abroad, which in his own experience at the Foreign Office had received nowhere near the same level of attention or resources. By his estimate, the McCann case attracted over 100 times the usual investment of time, money, and diplomatic effort. Nearly every spokesperson for the McCanns emerged from political circles, a sign of how strongly new Labour figures tied themselves to the abduction narrative and how determined they were to maintain it. Meanwhile, Portuguese investigators such as Gonçalo Amaral remarked on the political pressure they felt almost immediately. For them, the case became unusually complicated, not just a search for a missing child, but a matter intertwined with international politics and media influence. Even within policing circles, there was an acknowledgement of these unusual dynamics. Jim Gamble, then head of CEOP, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Center, later reflected on how events unfolded in Portugal. In his view, the local police were quickly overwhelmed. There was an initial flurry of activity, but soon a rush of external forces, political, diplomatic, and media-driven, swept in, and the case spiraled into something far larger than any standard child disappearance investigation. Gamble would go on to write a scoping report in 2009, reviewing and reflecting on the role of British police involvement. This report would later play a role in Scotland Yard's decision to launch Operation Grange in 2011. Analysts have acknowledged that the arrival of British law enforcement in Portugal created noticeable tension. In retrospect, many described it as having the feel of a colonial power stepping in. While some day-to-day cooperation between officers on the ground worked relatively smoothly, at the political and leadership level, there was clear frustration and at times resentment. Such reactions were perhaps inevitable given the unusual international involvement. But let's track back to the arrival of the dogs and the role of Mark Harrison in Praia da Luz. In mid-July 2007, around 2.5 months after Madeleine was last seen, Harrison was sent to Portugal. At the time, he was the National Search Advisor for all police agencies in the UK, and considered the country's leading expert in locating missing, abducted, or persons who have passed away. His assignment in Portugal was to build a report focusing specifically on the theory that Madeleine had passed away and that her body had been concealed. Harrison's analysis suggested that if Madeleine had passed away and her body been disposed of either on foot or by vehicle, there were several key sites that warranted re-examination. These included the creche, where Madeleine had been looked after, the McCann's holiday apartment, the other apartments of the so-called Tapas 7, the home, garden, and car of Robert Murat, the Praia da Luz beach and shoreline, and a vast open expanse east of the town stretching toward a golf course. Harrison noted that this open terrain offered many potential hiding places. Thick vegetation, wells, pockets of soft sand, and natural fissures in the cliffs. Harrison ultimately recommended that Portuguese investigators enlist the expertise of a dog handler, Martin Grime, and his 2 Springer Spaniels, Eddie and Keela. These dogs came with strong reputations. Eddie was trained as a human remains detection dog, capable of detecting the scent of human remains, while Keela specialized in locating human blood. Unlike typical police sniffer dogs, human remains and blood detection dogs undergo extensive, highly specialized training from a young age. According to police documentation, Eddie would only bark when he detected the scent of human remains, never at strangers, other dogs, or background noises. Similarly, Keela was conditioned to alert solely to human blood, not to saliva, sweat, semen, or other bodily fluids. In one official report, Grime asserted that Eddie had never been wrong in more than 200 previous cases. However, experts stress that while human remains and blood detection dogs can be highly reliable, their alerts do not constitute courtroom standard evidence on their own. Their indications must be corroborated by other forms of proof, such as DNA, physical remains, or confessions. In other words, the dogs are investigative tools, not definitive evidence. Specialists in the field explain that these dogs are essentially harnessing primal instincts. Unlike drug or explosive dogs trained to identify artificial scents, human remains, detection dogs are motivated by an instinctive drive to locate what to them equates to food, the scent of decomposition. Some case examples illustrate how sensitive these dogs can be, alerting to locations where a body had only briefly been stored, sometimes leaving no visible trace of blood or other fluids. That said, professionals also acknowledge the limitations. Even highly trained dogs are not flawless, and occasional mistakes can occur, whether due to environmental conditions, distractions, or misinterpretation of faint scents. Investigators therefore stress the importance of using multiple investigative methods, such as ground-penetrating radar or forensic testing, alongside the dogs, especially when both point to the same location. By July 31, 2007, Grime and his 2 Springer Spaniels began sweeping the priority sites identified by Harrison. According to official Portuguese police reports, the dogs alerted a total of 13 times across various locations. Eddie, the human remains detection dog, gave indications inside apartment 5A, the holiday flat where the McCanns had been staying. He signaled in the parents' bedroom, near a wardrobe, and again in the living room, behind a 2-seat blue sofa. Keela, the blood detection dog, alerted in the same location behind that sofa. This piece of evidence later formed a cornerstone of the unproven theory put forward by investigator Gonçalo Amaral, suggesting Madeleine may have passed away inside apartment 5A. Outside the flat, Eddie also gave a softer indication in a flower bed, suggesting a faint or weaker source of scent. Investigators noted this, but classified it as less conclusive. Portuguese police first confirmed that no death had ever been officially recorded inside apartment 5A. To push the investigation further, they collected various items of clothing from the villa the McCanns had moved into after leaving 5A. In a controlled search area, Eddie, the human remains detection dog, alerted to 2 of Kate McCann's items, a pair of black and white check trousers and a white t-shirt. He also signaled toward Madeleine's beloved soft toy, Cuddle Cat. Next came the cars. 10 vehicles were lined up in an underground car park, with their ownership kept strictly anonymous. This precaution was vital. Even the slightest body language from a handler could influence a dog's reaction. What you're about to watch is footage taken from that very search. In it, Eddie alerted at the door of the McCann's Renault Scenic. He also alerted to the car's electronic key. Then Keela, the blood detection dog, was brought in. Unlike Eddie, who barks, Keela signals by freezing completely still. She alerted inside the boot of the Renault. The problem was glaring. This car had only been hired 3 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. That meant one of 2 things. Either the dogs were producing false alerts, or the alerts suggested the presence of remains inside the vehicle after that date. Experts emphasize that while human remains detection and blood detection dogs are highly trained, their signals alone cannot be used as courtroom evidence. They serve as powerful tools to guide investigators, but confirmation must come from forensic testing. Forensic teams swabbed multiple areas inside apartment 5A and the Renault's boot, but the DNA samples were too small and ultimately deemed inconclusive by British laboratories. In a later analysis, leading forensic scientists have stressed how challenging such tiny degraded samples are to interpret. Beyond the apartment and the car, searches extended to the coastline and vast open areas around Praia da Luz. Investigators drove long metal rods into the ground, hoping to release human remains odor if a body had been buried. But again, nothing. After 8 days of work, search expert Mark Harrison finalized his report. He acknowledged the dogs' alerts, but stressed they could not be treated as confirmed evidence without corroboration. As he wrote, "No inference could be drawn about the presence of a body without additional supporting proof." According to experts, this created a troubling tension. On one hand, the dogs had shown consistent signals, some directly tied to the McCann's possessions and vehicle. On the other hand, the absence of DNA or physical evidence meant the case could not move forward on those alerts alone. When it comes to human remains detection dogs, there's always debate about how reliable they truly are. Yes, dogs can detect the scent of decomposition, but how long that scent actually lingers is questionable. In hot climates exposed to direct sunlight, the trace could fade within hours or days. On the other hand, in darker, cooler spaces, or when it clings to certain fabrics, it might last longer. But even then, it's not something that can stand on its own in court. Without corroborating evidence, relying solely on a dog's reaction is shaky at best. Some have also raised doubts about reports that the dogs alerted to a soft toy, or even a Bible, since neither appeared in the official Portuguese case files. What did stand out more was the indication inside apartment 5A, and later in the McCann's rental car, that naturally drew a lot of attention. The dogs used in this case had strong track records, but again, an alert alone doesn't prove anything without additional evidence. And when you factor in the timing, the car wasn't rented until weeks after Madeleine vanished, it's easy to see why many remain skeptical about what the alerts really meant. 1 month after the dog search had concluded, Portuguese police declared the McCanns arguidos, a Portuguese term meaning formal suspect. When the case was eventually shelved in 2008, that status was lifted from the McCanns. But in 2017, a Portuguese Supreme Court judge clarified that the lifting of arguido status did not mean that Kate and Gerry were innocent. In press interviews, Gerry McCann said he had extensively researched evidence about human remains detection dogs, calling them incredibly unreliable. As part of this research, the McCann's legal team began looking into a very strange case in Wisconsin involving a man named Eugene Zapata. U.S. authorities believed that Zapata had caused the death of his wife, Jeanette, in 1976. The couple was going through a messy divorce at the time, and Jeanette's body had never been located. Decades later, in 2006, Zapata was charged with first-degree murder. Part of the police case rested on the alerts of human remains detection dogs, who signaled at several locations linked to Zapata, including a basement of a former home, other properties he had owned, a storage locker, and even a rental car he had used in 2005. To many, these alerts seemed random, almost impossibly scattered. Zapata's defense team argued the dogs were wrong most of the time, citing figures of 78%, 71%, and 62% error rates. A judge agreed, ruling the dog evidence inadmissible because there was no body and no corroborating forensic support. He went so far as to say the reliability was no better than the flip of a coin. But in 2008, the case took a dramatic turn. Eugene Zapata confessed to taking Jeanette's life, admitting that he had moved her remains around the very locations where the dogs had alerted decades later. The dogs, once doubted, had been right all along. To summarize, the McCanns had pointed to the Zapata case as proof of human remains detection dogs' unreliability. Yet the outcome suggested the opposite, that even when logic and evidence seemed to fail, the dogs had correctly identified the presence of human remains. Still, many experts remain firm in their belief in these dogs. Some insist human remains detection dogs have proven reliable time and again, pointing to cases where they located bodies hidden or buried for years, long after traditional searches had come up empty. This part of the case really shines a light on the complex nature of using specialized evidence like a dog's alerts. It makes you wonder how we define what's truly reliable. With all of this in mind, what is your takeaway from the role these dogs played in the investigation?
We've also looked at evidence about cadaver dogs and they're incredibly unreliable.
Unreliable.
Cadaver dogs, yes. That's what the evidence shows if they're tested scientifically.
You read the files, Kate? Yes, I have read the files.
In the next episode, we turn to the crucial DNA evidence recovered from the car the McCanns hired 3 weeks after Madeleine went missing. Inside the luggage compartment, investigators found a mixture of DNA, and reports suggested that Madeleine's profile could not be ruled out. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think prosecutors will have enough to stop him before it's too late? And if you want more in-depth true crime stories like this one, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the story might be old, but justice still hasn't arrived. Thanks for watching.